Hello all, and welcome back to another fun-filled Reptile Mythbusters episode. In case the name doesn't give it away, I've been doing a series on reptile myths, and I've been attempting to bust them essentially. Either things that people have asked me over the years, or things that other reptile owners have heard, or just common misconceptions I've been working through to try to correct those things to better help for understanding of reptiles. And today I'm going to do a heavily controversial myth that some people do not think is a myth, and that's okay, but I'm going to present the side of it that I believe. So in essence, the myth is that if you feed your snake inside their enclosure where they live, they will eventually become cage aggressive and only associate you opening the cage with feeding time, and you'll have an aggressive snake. I'm going to talk a little bit about why that's probably a myth, and then I'm going to give some examples of my snakes who are all fed inside their cages and their different personalities regardless of how I feed them. So the idea, which I'm going to show with Zero, is that on feeding day, I would come get Zero, I would take her out of her enclosure, I would move her into a designated container. This is actually my container that I use to hold them when I clean their cages. So I'd put her in her container. It should be more organized. And then I would feed her in said container, close the container, wait for her to eat. Then when she was done eating, I would take her out and put her home. That's the idea, to keep your snake from being aggressive. That is supposedly what you should do. My first problem with this myth is that it assumes that the only reason you are going into your snake's enclosure is to feed them, because that's the only reason that a snake would associate you coming in with feeding them. When in reality, hopefully you are changing water dishes, which this is not going to trigger a feeding response because I go into my cages more for than just feeding. You should be cleaning out cages, checking for poop, making sure there's nothing like that in there, and you're handling your snakes. So right now, he doesn't smell any food, so there's no food. So that's my first issue with this myth, is that it assumes that you are only going into the cage to feed, ergo your snake associates you coming into the cage with feeding, when in reality, if you're going into the cage to do a lot of different things aside from just feeding, there's no reason the snake would associate you coming in with feeding. He could associate it with you giving him water, or you cleaning the cage, or you taking him out. There's a large array of things that you could be going into the cage for. My second issue, if this myth were true, so assume that I had just fed Snow in this container and I was coming back in to take her out. If it's true that the snake associates this bin with food time, then why would she not associate me coming to retrieve her with more food? Just because she's already eaten, that doesn't mean there's not food coming. So if Snow associated this food with eating so much, she would also bite me when I went to take her out of this enclosure. But that generally doesn't occur. My third issue is different snakes have different personalities. Some are just more food-oriented than others. Take Ajax, for example. He is not remotely food-oriented at all. I could probably stick my hand in his mouth and he would not think I am feeding him. He does not have an issue at all with me being in the cage, and I have no reason to worry about being bit with Ajax. He is fed in his cage. Now, Toro is another story. Because of her personality and the type of snake she is, see, she already thinks I'm going to feed her. She thinks I'm going to feed her every time I open the cage. I would not just reach in and pet Toro. Actually, I bet I can. Look, she's already mad. So because of Toro's personality, she thinks I'm going to feed her, and she is food-oriented. She's more likely scared than anything. She's also fed in her cage. Eve is also fed in her cage. You can see that I can move her water around. I can touch her. She does not think it's food time. I feed her inside her cage, but due to her personality and the type of snake she is, she doesn't think I'm going to feed her. My personal favorite for feeding are going to be my reticulated pythons. Hennessy is the sweetest snake in the world. Once I have her out, she is fabulous. But man, there's the feeding response. She thinks I'm gonna feed her. Reticulated pythons have such a quick metabolism that they are pretty much always hungry. So in order for me to get Hennessy out and let her know it's not food time, we do a quick hit on the head. She knows it's not time to eat, so she's actually not interested in what I'm doing. And now Hennessy is fine. I would never reach my hand into Hennessy or Midas's cage before they realized it was not time to eat. They are also fed in their cage, but this feeding response, as you can see, all of my snakes are fed in their cage. Only some of them have a strong feeding response, and I truly believe that's due to the type of snake and the personality of the snake. Something else I would like to add, as someone who feeds all of her snakes inside the enclosure, you would think that if my snakes were cage aggressive and food aggressive, that every time I reach into one of their cages, I would be bit and latched onto because they assume I'm feeding them. When in fact, I have never been latched by a snake. Every time I've been bit, I'm pretty sure it's been because I've either surprised them or scared them. All of my bites have been a bite and let go, more like a warning to get away from me. So I have never had a food-related feeding response error in terms of biting. So for me to have 19 snakes and not have that issue, I know it's all personal experience, but for that reason, I really don't believe in moving the snakes to feed them because I have never had a feeding response error like that. Something else I can say on the matter is that snakes rely heavily on scent to hunt. So the reason I have Vixie out is because when I first got her, she wouldn't eat for months. And that's because I believe that in the wild, hognoses eat frogs and toads and stuff like that. They don't eat rodents in the wild. And I was trying to feed her frozen thawed rodents, and the way we eventually got her to eat was actually scenting a rodent with a frozen toad. So if a snake's feeding is so heavily reliant on scent, if you don't smell like a dead rat, I feel like you're probably okay. There's nothing about us aside from the heat of our bodies that may signal to the snakes that we're food, but if they're so accustomed to eating frozen thawed rodents, then there's no reason for them to misassociate our hand with that. There are some snakes that won't even change from mice to rats or from rats to guinea pigs because they are so heavily reliant on that scent. So it's just hard for me to imagine that an animal that relies so heavily on scent for hunting and eating would so quickly misjudge me coming in to change their water for food time. And I do know feeding accidents do happen, like when people are trying to feed their snake the rat and the snake accidentally gets your hand because of the heat that's coming off, but I don't think that would be altered just because you feed your snake in a different enclosure. The thing I can say based on scent is there is a clear different behavioral pattern on my snake, or for my snakes on days when I'm not feeding versus on days that I feed. Like right now, all my snakes are in their huts, kind of relaxing, just hanging back, doing what they do. On feeding day, when I bring the rats in here, I usually let them sit in this room to thaw out because it's the hottest room in the house. They pretty much have their face plastered to the door. They know what time it is. They know it's time to eat. They are not like that on any other days, and I could not imagine trying to get them out and moving them into a separate bin to feed them. I would get mauled. So I would say feeding has everything to do with scent and nothing to do with the pattern of moving them into a new container. So that's my 2 cents on it, and now I'm going to talk a little bit about why I do not personally feed in a separate container. The final issue with feeding in a separate closure is the amount of stress it could potentially cause the snake. So I don't handle my snakes the entire day before I feed, so I feed on Fridays. So my last handling will be Thursday night, and then I don't handle them at all on Friday, and I try not to handle them until about midday on Saturday to give them some time to digest. So when you move a snake into a separate container, you're handling them 2 times around feeding. Sometimes when snakes are handled before feeding, they won't eat because they're not ready, they're scared, they just are not comfortable. And then sometimes when snakes are handled after eating, they'll actually regurgitate their meal, which is really unhealthy for a snake. But they do it instinctually because having that heavy stomach in the wild after eating is not conducive to getting away from a predator. So if a predator approaches in the wild, the snake is going to throw up their meal to get away. I've actually seen this happen in person on one of my field trips with one of my biology classes. My professor found a snake that had just finished eating a meal, and when he picked up the snake regurgitated, all in an effort to get away from the predator. Snakes don't know necessarily that after they've eaten that you're not a predator when you move them. So all in all, just to reduce stress, and because I don't see the correlation, I feed my snakes in their enclosures, and I have some pretty happy, healthy, non-aggressive snakes. I'm already aware that this video is going to be highly controversial. People seem to be so passionate either way. They either completely agree with me on this or they're going to completely disagree. There's really not a middle ground on this subject, unfortunately. But I'm always open to discuss things. I do not respond well to direct attacks. I'm actually sometimes pretty mean, I've been told. But I am open to discussion. I will talk about these sorts of things. But please let me know what you think. Like, comment, subscribe, share the videos. I'm always open to new video ideas. This one was the most requested. If I don't get any more Mythbusters, I will probably start on a new series because I've really hit the top controversial ones. So just let me know what you guys think, and I'll see y'all next week.